Hiroshima, August the 6th, 1945. At 8:15 in the morning, a single aircraft flies high above this industrial city of 350,000 people on the southern coast of Japan's main island. The war in Europe has been over for 3 months. Germany lies defeated, occupied, divided among the victors. But in the Pacific, the conflict continues. American forces island hop toward the Japanese homeland. Okinawa falls after 82 days of savage fighting that costs over 12,000 American lives and perhaps 100,000 Japanese military and civilian dead. Firebombing raids incinerate Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya. 67 Japanese cities burn. Yet Japan's military leadership refuses to surrender. The strategic situation leaves Allied planners with grim calculations. Invasion of the Japanese home islands, planned for November, threatens to cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties and millions of Japanese dead. Japanese forces still occupy vast territories across Asia and the Pacific. 8 million soldiers remain under arms. The government in Tokyo issues declarations of resistance to the bitter end. Civilians train with bamboo spears. Children prepare to die for the emperor. Meanwhile, in the New Mexico desert, 3 weeks earlier, scientists detonate the world's first atomic bomb. The blast equals 20,000 tons of conventional explosives. The heat vaporizes steel towers. Light flashes brighter than 1,000 suns. Now that terrifying new power arrives over Hiroshima. The city sprawls across the delta of the Ota River, where 7 tributaries flow into the inland sea. It serves as headquarters for Japan's 2nd General Army defending southern Honshu. Military installations dot the urban landscape. Factories produce weapons, ammunition, military supplies. Rail lines connect the city to the national network. The port handles military shipments. Yet Hiroshima has been spared the firebombing that devastates other Japanese cities. Citizens wonder why American bombers pass overhead without dropping their payloads. Some believe the city holds no strategic value. Others whisper that American relatives of local residents plead for mercy. Most simply feel grateful for each day without flames falling from the sky. At stake is nothing less than the future of warfare, the balance of global power, and the lives of millions across the Pacific theater. If this weapon succeeds as its creators promise, Japan faces annihilation unless it surrenders immediately. If it fails, American forces must invade Japan's beaches in what military planners predict will be the bloodiest campaign of the entire war. Japanese military leaders prepare for that invasion with a defense strategy accepting the death of the entire civilian population as acceptable cost for preserving national honor. The Imperial Japanese Army fortifies coastlines. It stockpiles weapons in mountain caves. It disperses aircraft for kamikaze attacks. It organizes civilian militia units. And it waits. The morning air is clear and hot over Hiroshima. Summer heat already bakes the city at 8 o'clock. Factory workers begin their shifts. Office employees commute to work. Mothers prepare meals. Children play in streets and yards. Air raid sirens sounded at 7:30 when American weather reconnaissance aircraft passed overhead. But the all clear followed minutes later. Life resumes its wartime rhythm of work, rationing, fear, and stubborn endurance. Few citizens look up as a single B-29 superfortress, the Enola Gay, approaches from the north at 31,000 feet. Fewer still notice 3 small parachutes deploying from the bomber's belly. Those parachutes carry instruments to measure what happens next. For 43 seconds, a cylindrical device 10 feet long and 28 inches in diameter falls toward the city center. Inside its casing, conventional explosives surround a subcritical mass of uranium-235. Fuses trigger at precisely the calculated altitude of 1,900 feet above the Aioi Bridge. In a fraction of a second, the explosives compress the uranium past critical mass. Nuclear fission begins. Atoms split. Energy releases. The temperature at the blast center reaches several million degrees. A fireball 400 meters wide forms. Light brighter than the sun illuminates the morning sky. Heat radiates outward at the speed of light. Then comes the shock wave. Then comes the fire. Then comes the wind that pulls everything toward the rising mushroom cloud. In one instant, 30,000 buildings vanish. In one moment, 70,000 people die. By year's end, that number doubles as radiation sickness claims those who survived the initial blast. The world enters the atomic age. Nothing will ever be the same. One survivor later writes, "It was as if the sun itself had fallen upon our city." The Japanese Empire reaches its maximum extent by mid-1942, controlling territory from Burma to the Central Pacific. But this vast domain begins crumbling almost immediately after the Battle of Midway in June 1942, where American carrier aircraft sink 4 Japanese fleet carriers in one catastrophic day. The United States begins its island-hopping campaign: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each battle brings American forces closer to Japan itself. By early 1945, the outcome is inevitable. Germany's surrender in May leaves Japan completely isolated. Yet Japanese military leadership refuses to accept reality. The Supreme Council for the Direction of the War debates endlessly without reaching consensus. Military leaders insist Japan can still achieve favorable peace terms through one final, decisive battle. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki tries to navigate between military diehards and officials who recognize defeat is certain. Emperor Hirohito remains largely silent, bound by constitutional convention. The government issues no hint of surrender, even as American strategic bombing reduces Japanese cities to ash. General Curtis LeMay's 21st Bomber Command adopts devastating new tactics beginning in March 1945. B-29 bombers fly at low altitude during night raids, dropping incendiary bombs designed to create firestorms in Japan's wood and paper cities. The first raid on Tokyo on March the 9th kills over 100,000 people in a single night. Subsequent raids destroy Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. By August, 67 Japanese cities have burned. The Japanese people endure this horror with stoic resignation. Food shortages worsen, malnutrition spreads, yet the government shows no sign of capitulation. The Manhattan Project begins in 1942 under scientific director J. Robert Oppenheimer. Thousands of scientists and engineers labor in secret facilities across the United States. At Los Alamos in New Mexico, physicists developed 2 bomb designs. The first, a uranium gun-type device nicknamed Little Boy, seems so reliable it requires no testing. The second design, a plutonium implosion device nicknamed Fat Man, demands extensive testing. On July the 16th, 1945, scientists detonate the first atomic bomb at Trinity Test Site in New Mexico. The explosion exceeds expectations. The fireball vaporizes the steel test tower. Sand fuses into radioactive glass. The mushroom cloud rises 7 miles high. Oppenheimer recalls a line from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." President Harry Truman, attending the Potsdam Conference, receives word of success. He now possesses power to end the war without invasion. The Potsdam Declaration, issued on July the 26th, demands Japan's unconditional surrender. It promises Japan will not be destroyed as a nation, but insists on elimination of militarism, occupation, and war crimes trials. It warns of prompt and utter destruction if Japan refuses. Prime Minister Suzuki publicly announces Japan will ignore the declaration, using the word mokusatsu, kill with silence. This response seals Hiroshima's fate. American planners select target cities based on specific criteria. Each must have military significance, be large enough to demonstrate the weapon's power, and remain relatively undamaged by previous bombing, so atomic effects can be clearly assessed. Hiroshima meets all criteria perfectly. The city serves as Second General Army headquarters. It contains military supply depots, embarkation facilities, and manufacturing plants. Its population of 350,000 makes it Japan's 7th largest city. American bombers have deliberately avoided it during previous raids. The 509th Composite Group trains for the atomic mission at Wendover Field in Utah, then deploys to Tinian Island. Colonel Paul Tibbets commands the unit. On August the 4th, technicians assemble Little Boy in an air-conditioned building on Tinian. The complete weapon weighs 9,700 pounds. It contains destructive power equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT compressed into a package 10 feet long. Weather reconnaissance reports clear skies over Hiroshima on August the 5th. At 2:45 in the morning of August the 6th, the Enola Gay lifts off from Tinian, straining under fuel and bomb weight. The flight north takes 6 hours. Navy Captain William Parsons arms the bomb during flight. At 7:30, the aircraft reaches the Japanese coast. Hiroshima wakes to its final morning. Factory workers clock in. Schoolchildren gather for assemblies. Housewives shop in markets. Soldiers drill at barracks. The city's civil defense maintains constant vigilance. Thousands of civilians, including middle school students, participate in creating fire breaks by demolishing buildings. Many demolition workers gather in the city center this Monday morning. At 8:09, air raid sirens sound. Most assume it is another reconnaissance flight. Few take shelter. The all-clear sounds at 8:14. People emerge. Work resumes. 1 minute later, at 8:15 and 17 seconds, the Enola Gay releases Little Boy from 31,000 feet. One crew member aboard the Enola Gay later recalls, "The flash was terrific, like a giant flashbulb going off. Even with my dark glasses on, I could see the bones in my hand." A student mobilized for demolition work remembers, "I heard the drone of a plane in the blue sky, just one. We looked up and saw it glinting in the sun." The uranium projectile inside Little Boy accelerates down the gun barrel at the moment of detonation. Conventional explosives fire the subcritical uranium slug into the uranium target at the weapon's opposite end. The two masses combine to form a supercritical mass. Nuclear fission begins. In less than 1/1,000,000th of a second, uranium atoms split in an exponential chain reaction. Each fission releases neutrons that trigger more fissions. Energy releases on a scale never before achieved by human technology. The temperature at the center of the reaction reaches several million degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. A fireball 400 meters in diameter forms instantaneously at an altitude of 600 meters above the Shima Surgical Clinic near the Aioi Bridge. The bridge, a distinctive T-shaped structure visible from high altitude, serves as the aiming point. The blast occurs almost directly above the city's commercial and administrative center. Thermal radiation travels outward at the speed of light. Everything within a kilometer of the hypocenter experiences heat exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. Granite melts, roof tiles fuse, metal vaporizes. Human bodies directly beneath the fireball flash into carbon shadows on stone surfaces, the only trace that they ever existed. People within 1 kilometer of the blast die instantly. Those farther away have seconds to realize something unimaginable has occurred. The flash fills the sky. Darkness becomes noon bright. Survivors describe a soundless white light that seems to fill the universe. A young woman standing in her kitchen sees the flash and instinctively drops to the floor. The blast wave arrives 1 second later, traveling at the speed of sound. It tears her house apart around her. A soldier on a hillside 3 kilometers away sees the city suddenly illuminate in blinding white light. He throws himself to the ground. The shock wave passes over him seconds later with a sound like thunder that never ends. The blast wave radiates outward in all directions at approximately 340 meters per second. At ground zero, the overpressure exceeds 20 pounds per square inch. No building can withstand such force. The Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, a European-style building with a distinctive dome, stands only 160 meters from the hypercenter. The blast wave strikes from almost directly above. The building's walls survive because the pressure hits them perpendicularly. but the dome framework remains standing even as everything around it disintegrates. This structure, later preserved as the atomic bomb dome, becomes the only building near ground zero recognizable after the blast. Within a radius of 2 kilometers, 90% of all buildings collapse or are severely damaged. The blast wave smashes through wood frame houses like a giant fist. Walls explode outward. Roofs lift off and cartwheel through the air. Concrete, buildings crack and crumble. Glass shatters into millions of flying shards that slice through everything in their path. People inside buildings die crushed under collapsing walls and roofs. Those outside are thrown through the air like leaves in a hurricane. The blast wave compresses air so violently that many victims' internal organs rupture from the pressure differential. Fire follows immediately after the blast. The thermal pulse ignites everything combustible within 2 kilometers of the hypercenter. Paper, wood, cloth, all burst into flames simultaneously. Thousands of individual fires merge into a firestorm. The heat creates powerful updrafts that pull in air from all directions, feeding the flames with oxygen. Wind speeds reach 100 kilometers per hour, sucking debris, smoke, and people toward the growing inferno. The firestorm generates its own weather system. Hot air rises rapidly, creating a partial vacuum at ground level. Cool air rushes in to fill that vacuum, creating windstorms that fan the flames higher. Black rain begins falling approximately 20 minutes after the explosion. The mushroom cloud rises 9 miles into the atmosphere, carrying with it pulverized debris, vaporized materials, and radioactive particles. Water vapor condenses around these particles in the cool upper atmosphere. Heavy, oily drops start falling on the northwestern outskirts of the city. The rain is black, contaminated with soot, ash, and radioactive fallout. People caught in the firestorm stumble through burning ruins seeking water. Some drink the black rain, not knowing it carries poison. Others try to wash burn wounds with it, driving radioactive particles into their flesh. Survivors emerge from the wreckage into a landscape transformed beyond recognition. The city center has vanished. Where moments before stood a bustling urban district of shops, homes, offices, and temples, there remains only flat devastation stretching in every direction. Fires burn everywhere. Smoke obscures the sky. The living wander among the dead, many too shocked to speak or scream. Burns cover exposed skin. Clothing has been torn away by the blast. Glass fragments protrude from flesh. Many people walk as if in a trance, arms extended in front of them to prevent burned skin on their hands and arms from touching their bodies. The Motoyasu and Honkawa rivers that flow through Hiroshima's center become charnel houses. Thousands of people, their bodies burning, stagger toward the water seeking relief. They jump or fall into the rivers and drown. Bodies pile up along the riverbanks. The water itself grows hot from the number of burning people entering it. Some survivors cling to bridge pilings or float on debris. Others simply sink beneath the surface, too weak to swim. The rivers, which should have provided refuge, become mass graves holding thousands of corpses that will bob in the current for days. Medical facilities cease to exist. The Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital, the city's largest medical facility, stands approximately 1 kilometer from the hypercenter. The blast crushes most of the building, killing patients and staff instantly. Dr. Terufumi Sasaki, one of the few physicians who survives, finds himself suddenly responsible for treating hundreds of critically injured people with almost no supplies or assistance. The hospital's medical equipment lies buried in rubble. Medicine cabinets are smashed. Beds are splinters. Dr. Sasaki works continuously for days, often with his bare hands, knowing that for most patients he can do nothing. Nurses and doctors who survive face overwhelming catastrophe. 70% of Hiroshima's medical personnel die in the blast or its immediate aftermath. The few who remain quickly exhaust their limited supplies of bandages, medicine, and surgical equipment. They cannot comprehend the nature of the injuries they see. Burns cover entire bodies. Radiation exposure causes symptoms no one recognizes. People who seem only lightly injured suddenly deteriorate and die. Wounds refuse to heal. Victims vomit uncontrollably. Hair falls out in clumps. Skin develops purple spots that mark internal bleeding. The doctors have no framework for understanding what is happening. Communication with the outside world dies with the city. Every telephone line is severed. Telegraph stations are destroyed. Radio equipment burns. The railway station is demolished. For hours, the rest of Japan knows nothing of what happened at Hiroshima. Military headquarters in Tokyo receives confused reports of a massive explosion, but details remain vague. The extent of the catastrophe only becomes clear when reconnaissance aircraft fly over the city hours later and photograph the devastation. Even then, officials cannot believe what they see. An entire city has been destroyed by a single bomb. Such a thing seems impossible. Survivors who can walk begin evacuating the city. They stumble through burning streets toward the outskirts, toward the hills, toward anywhere away from the inferno. Many collapse before reaching safety. Others make it to suburban neighborhoods or nearby villages and spread the horror to those areas. Residents of towns 5 and 10 kilometers from Hiroshima see thousands of injured people staggering toward them, asking for water, begging for help, and then dying in their streets. These outlying communities quickly become overwhelmed with casualties they have no capacity to treat. The mushroom cloud above Hiroshima rises to a height of 13 kilometers. Crew members aboard the Enola Gay, now flying away from the city at maximum speed, feel the bomber shudder from the shockwave, even though they are 17 kilometers distant. They look back and see the cloud climbing toward them. Tail gunner Bob Caron describes it as a living creature, a churning mass of colors: purple, red, white, and brown. The cloud spreads at its top into the characteristic mushroom shape that will become the symbol of atomic warfare. Beneath that cloud, 70,000 people are already dead. Another 70,000 will die within 5 years from burns, injuries, and radiation sickness. Night falls on a city that no longer exists. Fires burn uncontrolled. There are no fire brigades to fight them, no intact water mains to supply water, no buildings left to save. The firestorm consumes everything combustible and then gradually dies for lack of fuel. Survivors huddle in the ruins, many unable to move, calling for water, calling for help, calling for family members who will never answer. The darkness brings no relief. Groans and cries fill the air. The smell of burning flesh pervades everything. Rats emerge from the rubble to feed on the dead, and still, most of the world does not yet know what has happened. One survivor, a schoolgirl named Kinwei Tomoyasu, later recalls, "I heard a tremendous explosion. There was a flash, a great blaze of light. I was thrown to the ground. When I looked up, everything had disappeared. My friends, the buildings, everything was gone." A soldier stationed 3 kilometers from the blast later writes, "The faces of the people coming toward me were burned and swollen. Their skin hung down in strips. They held their arms out in front of them with their hands dangling. They looked like ghosts walking in a line." Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, director of the Hiroshima Communications Hospital, remembers, "Those who were able walked silently toward the suburbs in the distant hills, their spirits broken, their initiative gone. When asked whence they came, they pointed to the city and said, 'That way,' and when asked where they were going, pointed away from the city and said, 'This way.'" Dawn on August the 7th reveals the full extent of Hiroshima's destruction. 13 square kilometers of the city center lie flattened. Of 76,000 buildings within city limits, 70,000 are destroyed or severely damaged. Smoke rises from smoldering ruins. Bodies lie everywhere, in streets, in rivers, in the wreckage of what were homes and schools and shops. Survivors who sheltered through the night emerged to search for family members, for food, for water, for any sign of hope. They find mostly death. Rescue efforts begin in the outlying areas that escaped complete destruction. Military units stationed outside the city march into the ruins to search for survivors and restore order. Soldiers encounter scenes that break their discipline and training. Entire neighborhoods have vanished. Corpses are burned beyond recognition. Living victims beg for water, with voices barely above whispers. The soldiers distribute what water they have, knowing it is not nearly enough. They try to organize aid stations, but they have no medical supplies, no stretchers, no vehicles that can navigate streets blocked with rubble. They can only bear witness to catastrophe beyond their capacity to address. Radiation sickness begins manifesting in the days following the blast. People who survived with only minor injuries suddenly develop mysterious symptoms. They vomit repeatedly. They run high fevers. Purple spots appear on their skin, marking subcutaneous bleeding. Their hair falls out in clumps. Gums bleed. Wounds that should heal become infected and gangrenous. Doctors have no explanation for these symptoms. They have no treatment that works. They watch helplessly as patients who seem to be recovering suddenly die. The invisible poison of radiation does its work silently, killing cells, destroying bone marrow, preventing blood from clotting. In Tokyo, Japan's Supreme Council for the Direction of the War convenes to discuss Hiroshima. Reports from the city describe unprecedented destruction. Military intelligence analysts conclude the Americans have used a new type of bomb, possibly atomic in nature. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo argues this development makes surrender imperative. War Minister General Anami disagrees. He suggests the United States possesses only one such weapon and cannot have produced more. He insists Japan must fight on. The Council deadlocks. No decision is reached. Emperor Hirohito receives reports but issues no immediate directive. The military's grip on government decision-making remains unbroken. President Truman authorizes public announcement of the atomic bombing. On August the 7th, the world learns what happened at Hiroshima. The White House statement describes a weapon more than 2,000 times as powerful as the largest conventional bomb, a weapon that harnesses the basic power of the universe. The announcement warns Japan that if it does not accept terms of surrender, it can expect a rain of ruin from the air the like of which has never been seen on Earth. Radio broadcasts carry the news globally. In Allied nations, citizens celebrate what seems to be the beginning of the end. In Japan, the government maintains radio silence about Hiroshima's fate, attempting to suppress the catastrophic news. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov summons Japanese Ambassador Naotake Sato to his office in Moscow at 5 o'clock in the evening on August the 8th. Molotov reads a brief statement. The Soviet Union, citing Japan's rejection of the Potsdam Declaration, declares war on Japan effective August the 9th. The announcement stuns the Japanese diplomat. Japan has maintained a neutrality pact with the Soviet Union, hoping Moscow might mediate peace terms with the Western Allies. That hope dies in Molotov's office. Sato cables Tokyo with the disastrous news. Japan now faces enemies on all sides with no possibility of negotiated peace. At 1 minute past midnight on August the 9th, Soviet forces launched their offensive into Japanese-occupied Manchuria. 1.5 million Soviet troops, supported by 5,000 tanks and 5,000 aircraft, pour across the border. The Japanese Kwantung Army, once the Empire's most formidable fighting force, has been stripped of its best units to defend the home islands and fight in the Pacific. The remaining forces, poorly equipped and undermanned, collapse within hours under the Soviet onslaught. Soviet mechanized columns race across Manchurian plains. Japanese defensive lines disintegrate. Thousands of Japanese soldiers surrender. Thousands more flee. The Empire's last major army outside the home islands ceases to exist as an effective fighting force within 3 days. At 11:02 in the morning on August the 9th, while Japan's leaders debate the implications of Soviet entry into the war, Major Charles Sweeney pilots the B-29 bomber Boxcar toward its primary target of Kokura. Boxcar carries Fat Man, the plutonium implosion bomb. Clouds obscure Kokura during 3 bombing runs. Anti-aircraft fire increases. Fuel runs low due to a malfunction. Sweeney diverts to the secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02, Fat Man falls from the bomb bay. At 11:02 and 43 seconds, it detonates at an altitude of 500 meters above the Urakami Valley in northern Nagasaki. Fat Man yields 22 kilotons, more powerful than Little Boy, but Nagasaki's hilly terrain limits the blast damage. The bomb explodes over an industrial valley rather than a flat urban center. Hills shield portions of the city from the thermal pulse and blast wave. Nevertheless, the weapon obliterates the Urakami Valley completely. The Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works, the Mitsubishi Urakami Ordnance Works, and numerous smaller factories vanish. Residential neighborhoods disappear. The Urakami Cathedral, the largest Christian church in Asia, collapses. Approximately 35,000 people die instantly. Another 40,000 will die by year's end from injuries and radiation exposure. Japan's military leaders receive news of Nagasaki while still processing the shock of Soviet invasion. 2 atomic bombs in 3 days. A massive Soviet offensive from the north. American forces poised to invade from the south. The strategic situation has become untenable. Yet War Minister Anami and the military chiefs of staff continue to resist unconditional surrender. They demand guarantees preserving the emperor's sovereignty, preventing Allied occupation, allowing Japan to conduct its own war crimes trials, and permitting Japanese forces to disarm themselves. These conditions amount to negotiated peace, not unconditional surrender. Prime Minister Suzuki knows the Allies will reject such terms. Emperor Hirohito breaks the deadlock. On August the 9th, past midnight into August the 10th, he convenes an imperial conference in his underground air raid shelter. For hours, the Supreme Council debates without resolution. Military leaders argue for continuing the war. Civilian ministers argue for acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration with only one condition: preservation of the emperor's position. The council divides 3-3. Prime Minister Suzuki makes an unprecedented request. He asks the emperor to make the decision himself. Hirohito speaks. His voice is quiet, but firm. He says he cannot bear to see his people suffer any longer. He accepts the Potsdam Declaration provided the emperor's prerogatives are not compromised. The decision is made. Japan transmits its conditional acceptance of surrender through Swiss diplomatic channels on August the 10th. The message accepts the Potsdam Declaration's terms with the understanding that said declaration does not comprise any demand which prejudices the prerogatives of His Majesty as a sovereign ruler. President Truman and Secretary of State James Burns consult with Allied leaders. The American reply, drafted carefully to avoid explicit guarantees while implicitly allowing the emperor to remain, states that the authority of the emperor and the Japanese government to rule shall be subject to the supreme commander of the Allied powers. The Allies will not explicitly dethrone Hirohito, but neither will they guarantee his position. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, survivors struggle through hell. Relief supplies arrive slowly and in insufficient quantities. Field hospitals set up in the suburbs overflow with casualties. Medical staff work without rest, but they can save few. Burns covering 50% of the body usually prove fatal. Radiation victims display symptoms no doctor can treat. Infection kills those who survive the initial blast and burns. Water remains scarce. Food supplies dwindle. Looters strip corpses of valuables. Orphaned children wander the ruins crying for parents who are dead. The living envy the dead who at least are beyond suffering. Bodies must be disposed of before disease spreads further. Cremation teams work, day and night burning corpses on makeshift funeral pyres, fueled with debris from destroyed buildings. The smell of burning flesh pervades the ruins. Ashes drift on the wind. Rivers still contain floating corpses that must be pulled out and burned. Mass graves are dug for bodies too numerous to cremate individually. Identification is often impossible. Families cannot find their dead to mourn them properly. Buddhist and Shinto funeral rites cannot be observed. The dead receive only hasty cremation or burial without ceremony. Radioactive contamination spreads through the city's ruins. Rain washes fallout into water supplies. Survivors drink contaminated water because they have no choice. They eat food contaminated with radioactive particles. They breathe air thick with radioactive dust. They live in shelters built from radioactive rubble. The poison accumulates in their bodies, attacking bone marrow, damaging chromosomes, causing cancers that will not manifest for years or decades. Those who seem healthy now may sicken and die months or years later. Children exposed in utero will be born with developmental problems. The radiation's genetic damage will affect generations yet unborn. Japan's military leaders make one final attempt to prevent surrender. On the night of August the 14th, after Emperor Hirohito records his surrender announcement for broadcast the following day, a group of army officers launch a coup attempt. They occupy the Imperial Palace grounds, seeking to destroy the recording and prevent the broadcast. The coup fails when senior army leaders refuse to support it. The plotters commit suicide. The recording survives. At noon on August the 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice broadcasts across Japan for the first time in history. He announces that the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, and that the empire accepts the Potsdam Declaration. He does not use the word surrender, but every Japanese listener understands. The war is over. One Hiroshima survivor, Futaba Kitayama, later recalls, "The next day people came into the city to look for their relatives. They walked through the streets calling out names, searching in the ruins. Most found only bones or nothing at all." A nurse working in a makeshift hospital writes, "Patients who had only small injuries would suddenly die. We could not understand it. They would seem to be recovering. Then their hair would fall out. They would bleed from their mouths, and they would be dead within hours." Foreign Minister Togo later reflects, "When the second bomb fell on Nagasaki, even the most stubborn of our military leaders understood that we could not continue. If the Americans had 3, 4, or 10 such weapons, Japan would cease to exist." Japan's formal surrender ceremony takes place on September the 2nd, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, wearing formal morning dress and top hat, limps up the gangway on his wooden leg. He is accompanied by General Yoshijiro Umezu, Chief of the Army General Staff, who wears full military uniform and refuses to remove his sword until ordered to do so. They represent a defeated nation forced to accept terms it never imagined accepting. General Douglas MacArthur presides over the ceremony. Admiral Chester Nimitz represents the United States Navy. Delegates from China, Britain, the Soviet Union, Australia, Canada, France, the Netherlands, and New Zealand witness Japan's capitulation. The surrender document lies on a mess table covered with green felt. At 9:04 in the morning, Shigemitsu signs on behalf of the Emperor and the Japanese government. His hand shakes. General Umezu signs for the Japanese armed forces. His face remains expressionless, but those who know him recognize the shame and anger he barely controls. MacArthur signs for the Allied powers. Nimitz signs for the United States. Representatives of the other Allied nations add their signatures. The ceremony lasts 23 minutes. When it concludes, the Japanese Empire as a political entity ceases to exist after 2,600 years of claimed imperial continuity. The sun has set on the land of the rising sun. American occupation forces land at Atsugi Airfield on August the 30th. MacArthur arrives on August the 30th as Supreme Commander for the Allied powers. He establishes headquarters in Tokyo and begins implementing occupation policies designed to demilitarize and democratize Japan. The emperor remains on his throne, but loses his divine status. On January the 1st, 1946, Hirohito broadcasts another speech renouncing his divinity and acknowledging his humanity. The gesture shocks traditional Japanese society, but is required by the occupiers. MacArthur uses the emperor as a tool to legitimize occupation and ensure Japanese cooperation with Allied directives. The occupation transforms Japan fundamentally. American authorities purge military leaders and ultranationalists from positions of power. They disband the armed forces completely. Japan's army, navy, and air force cease to exist. The military ministries are dissolved. Weapons are confiscated and destroyed. War production facilities are dismantled or converted to civilian use. The zaibatsu, industrial conglomerates that fueled Japan's war machine, are broken up. Land reform redistributes property from wealthy landlords to tenant farmers. Labor unions are legalized and encouraged. Women receive the right to vote for the first time in Japanese history. A new constitution, drafted primarily by American lawyers in MacArthur's headquarters, is promulgated on November 3, 1946, and takes effect on May 3, 1947. The Constitution contains Article 9, which renounces war as a sovereign right and prohibits Japan from maintaining military forces. The emperor becomes a symbolic figurehead with no political power. Sovereignty resides with the people, not the throne. The Constitution guarantees civil liberties, establishes parliamentary democracy, and creates an independent judiciary. It remains in effect unchanged into the 21st century, the oldest unamended constitution currently in force. War crimes trials proceed at multiple levels. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East, commonly called the Tokyo Trials, begins on May 3, 1946. 28 Japanese military and political leaders face charges including crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Chief Prosecutor Joseph Keenan presents evidence of Japanese atrocities across Asia: the rape of Nanking, the Bataan Death March, medical experiments on prisoners, forced labor, sexual slavery. The trials last 2.5 years. 7 defendants receive death sentences and are hanged on December 23, 1948. 16 receive life imprisonment. 2 die during the trial. 1 is found mentally incompetent. Emperor Hirohito is not charged, a decision MacArthur makes to preserve stability during occupation. The general believes that trying the emperor would provoke massive resistance and make Japan ungovernable. Critics argue this allows the man who presided over Japan's wars of aggression to escape justice. Defenders respond that Hirohito was a constitutional monarch bound by his ministers' decisions. The debate over his responsibility continues. Regardless of his actual culpability, the decision not to prosecute him enables smooth occupation and Japan's transformation into a peaceful democracy. Lower-level trials prosecute thousands of military personnel for conventional war crimes. Class B and Class C war criminals face justice for specific atrocities: massacres of prisoners and civilians, torture, forced labor, sexual slavery. Trials occur throughout Asia in locations where crimes were committed. Over 5,000 Japanese are convicted. Approximately 900 are executed. Many receive prison sentences. The trials, while imperfect, establish precedents for prosecuting war crimes and lay groundwork for modern international criminal law. Questions about the atomic bombing's morality begin almost immediately. President Truman defends the decision as necessary to save lives. He cites projected casualties for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, which military planners estimate could cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and millions of Japanese dead. Secretary of War Henry Stimson argues the bombs shortened the war by months, preventing continued conventional bombing, naval blockade starvation, and Soviet advances that would have killed vastly more people than died at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Critics emerge even during the war's immediate aftermath. Some military leaders question whether the bombings were necessary. Admiral William Leahy, Truman's chief of staff, later writes that the Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender. General Dwight Eisenhower expresses similar views. They argue that Japan's situation was hopeless: navy destroyed, air force depleted, cities burned, economy strangled, and now the Soviet Union entering the war. Surrender was inevitable. The atomic bombs, in this view, merely hastened an outcome that would have occurred regardless, making their use against civilian populations morally indefensible. The debate intensifies in subsequent decades as more information becomes available. Historians examine Japanese government documents from August 1945. Some argue these show Japan was seeking surrender terms before the atomic bombs fell. Others contend that Japanese military leaders were prepared to fight to national suicide rather than accept unconditional surrender. The argument turns on interpretation of incomplete evidence and counterfactual speculation about what would have happened if atomic bombs had not been used. No consensus emerges. Each generation re-examines the decision through its own moral framework. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, physical reconstruction proceeds slowly but steadily. The Japanese government designates both cities for special reconstruction assistance. Urban planners design wider streets and more open spaces to prevent future firestorm spread. Hiroshima rebuilds around the concept of becoming a city of peace. The destroyed city center becomes Peace Memorial Park, preserving the atomic bomb dome as a monument and warning. Nagasaki similarly preserves hypocenter sites and builds peace facilities. Both cities attract international attention as symbols of nuclear weapons' humanitarian consequences. The economic recovery surprises observers. By the early 1950s, Japan's economy grows rapidly. American occupation policies, initially punitive, shift to supporting recovery as Cold War tensions rise and the United States seeks a stable, prosperous, anti-communist ally in Asia. American aid pours into Japan. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, provides enormous stimulus as Japan becomes a manufacturing and logistical base for United Nations forces. Factories that built weapons now build trucks, ships, and supplies for the war effort. The economy booms. By the late 1950s, Japan's economic miracle is underway. Hiroshima and Nagasaki participate in this recovery while simultaneously developing identities as peace cities. Tourism develops around peace memorials. International conferences on nuclear disarmament convene in both cities. Hibakusha organize and become powerful voices against nuclear weapons. They testify at the United Nations. They travel internationally, sharing their experiences. They lobby governments. Their witness keeps the memory of atomic warfare's humanitarian consequences alive as the world builds ever larger nuclear arsenals. The Treaty of San Francisco, signed on September 8, 1951, formally ends the state of war between Japan and most Allied powers. It takes effect on April 28, 1952, ending the occupation. Japan regains sovereignty as an independent nation. The treaty is generous compared to the harsh terms imposed on Germany after World War I. Japan loses territories acquired through conquest, but retains the home islands. Reparations are limited. Japan is permitted to rebuild its economy. The goal is creating a stable, democratic, prosperous Japan aligned with the West against communism. The security treaty between the United States and Japan, signed simultaneously with the peace treaty, allows American military bases to remain on Japanese soil. This arrangement continues into the 21st century, making Japan a cornerstone of American strategic presence in Asia. The bases protect Japan, which lacks significant military forces due to its pacifist constitution. They also serve American interests by projecting power throughout the Pacific. The arrangement proves mutually beneficial, despite occasional tensions over base locations and criminal incidents involving American personnel. By 1955, a decade after the atomic bombings, Japan has transformed almost beyond recognition. Democracy is functioning. The economy is growing rapidly. Living standards are rising. The military threat that Japan posed to Asia is gone. The country that launched wars of conquest across the Pacific has become a peaceful trading nation. The cities that were annihilated are rebuilding. The transformation is not complete or without problems, but the direction is clear. Out of apocalyptic destruction, something new emerges. One Japanese diplomat later reflects, "The atomic bombs destroyed our cities, but also destroyed the militarism that led us to ruin." From that destruction came the opportunity to rebuild Japan as a peaceful democracy. Whether this justifies the bomb's use is a question each person must answer for themselves. General MacArthur, reviewing his tenure as Supreme Commander, later states, The atomic bomb provided the ultimate demonstration that further resistance was futile. It gave the emperor and those who sought peace the justification they needed to overcome military diehards. Whether it was the only way to achieve surrender, we will never know with certainty. The human toll of the atomic bombings defies comprehension. In Hiroshima, estimates place the immediate death toll at 70 to 80,000 people killed within seconds or minutes of the blast. By the end of 1945, that number climbs to approximately 140,000 as burns, injuries, and radiation sickness claim additional lives. By 1950, the total exceeds 200,000. In Nagasaki, approximately 35 to 40,000 die instantly. By year's end, the death toll reaches 70,000. By 1950, it approaches 140,000. Combined, the two bombings kill well over 300,000 human beings, with deaths continuing for decades afterward. The wounded vastly outnumber the dead in the immediate aftermath. Estimates suggest 100,000 people in Hiroshima suffer serious injuries requiring medical treatment. In Nagasaki, the number approaches 75,000. Burns cover their bodies. Glass shards and debris lacerate their flesh. Broken bones, crushed limbs, and internal injuries afflict thousands. But the medical infrastructure to treat these casualties no longer exists. Hiroshima's 150 doctors are reduced to fewer than 30 able to work. Of the city's 1,700 nurses, over 1,300 are dead or incapacitated. Medical supplies are destroyed. Hospitals are rubble. The wounded receive minimal care or none at all. Radiation sickness manifests in waves. Those exposed to massive doses die within hours or days, their bodies overwhelmed by cellular destruction. Those with moderate exposure develop symptoms 2 to 4 weeks after the bombing. Their hair falls out. Purple spots appear on their skin, marking subcutaneous hemorrhaging. They vomit blood. Their gums bleed continuously. White blood cell counts plummet, leaving them defenseless against infection. Many die from sepsis as their immune systems collapse. Those who survive this acute phase face lifetime health consequences, including dramatically increased cancer rates, cataracts, liver disease, and cardiovascular problems. Children suffer disproportionately. Approximately 10,000 children under the age of 15 die in Hiroshima. Thousands more are orphaned when their parents perish. Infants and young children are particularly vulnerable to radiation's effects. Their rapidly dividing cells suffer catastrophic damage. Many who survive develop growth abnormalities, mental disabilities, and childhood cancers at rates far exceeding normal populations. Mothers pregnant at the time of the bombings give birth to children with microcephaly, a condition causing abnormally small heads and severe mental retardation. Over 30% of pregnant women within 1 kilometer of the Hiroshima hypercenter miscarry or deliver stillborn infants. Specific individual stories illustrate the broader tragedy. Sadako Sasaki is 2 years old when the bomb explodes. She survives the initial blast relatively unharmed, living 1.5 kilometers from the hypercenter. She grows into a healthy, active child and becomes an accomplished runner at school. But in November 1954, at age 11, she develops swelling in her neck and behind her ears. Doctors diagnose leukemia caused by radiation exposure 9 years earlier. She spends the next year in and out of the hospital. According to one account, she folds over 1,000 origami paper cranes, hoping to fulfill the legend that doing so grants a wish for recovery. She dies on October the 25th, 1955. She is 12 years old. Prisoners of war held in Hiroshima and Nagasaki also perish in the bombings. Approximately a dozen American POWs die at Hiroshima, held in a military police headquarters near the city center. In Nagasaki, Dutch, British, and Australian POWs working as forced laborers in the Mitsubishi shipyards are killed when Fat Man detonates. Their deaths receive little attention for decades, an uncomfortable footnote to the narrative of American technological triumph. Japanese authorities initially deny Allied prisoners were present, then later acknowledge their deaths without providing details or assistance to families seeking information. The displacement of populations proves massive. Of Hiroshima's pre-war population of 350,000, approximately 62,000 flee or are evacuated in the bombing's aftermath. They scatter to surrounding towns and villages, overwhelming local resources. Many live in makeshift camps with inadequate shelter, food, and sanitation. Disease spreads rapidly through these refugee populations. Dysentery, typhoid, and tuberculosis kill those who survived the atomic blast. Winter 1945 brings freezing temperatures and heavy snow. Refugees die of exposure, huddled in shacks built from salvaged wood and sheet metal. Infrastructure destruction approaches totality in both cities' centers. In Hiroshima, 69% of all buildings are destroyed or severely damaged. 13 square kilometers are reduced to flat wasteland. Every bridge across the Ota River's tributaries is damaged or destroyed. Railroad tracks are twisted. Roads are impassable under debris. The electrical grid ceases functioning. Water mains rupture. Telephone lines are severed. Gas lines leak or explode. The city's economic base is annihilated. Factories, workshops, shops, offices, all are gone. Employment vanishes overnight for tens of thousands who survive. Bodies require disposal before decomposition spreads disease. Cremation teams work continuously for weeks, burning corpses on makeshift pyres fueled with debris. The Hiroshima city government organizes systematic collection and cremation operations. Workers, many of them soldiers from outside units, gather bodies into piles and burn them in open areas. Identification is usually impossible. Families cannot locate their dead. Buddhist and Shinto funeral practices requiring specific prayers and rituals cannot be observed. Mass cremation violates deeply held beliefs about treating the dead with dignity, but necessity overrides tradition. Ashes from these mass cremations are later interred in common graves marked only with the date. Rivers continue yielding corpses for weeks. The Motoyasu and Honkawa rivers that flow through Hiroshima's center become recovery sites where workers fish out bodies daily. Many corpses are bloated beyond recognition. Some are charred black. Others show little external damage, but died from radiation or drowning. Recovery teams pull thousands from the water and transport them to cremation sites. The stench of death pervades the city. Those assigned to body recovery duty often cannot eat for days afterward. Many suffer psychological trauma from the work that haunts them for life. Families are shattered completely. Multi-generational households common in Japanese society are wiped out entirely. Grandparents, parents, children, all dead. Those who survive often lose everyone they love. A mother searches for her 3 children, finding only their charred remains identified by the metal buttons on their school uniforms. A husband returns from military service to find his wife, 2 children, and parents dead, his home vanished, his neighborhood erased. A young woman survives but loses her parents, siblings, husband, and infant son. She attempts suicide multiple times, unable to bear the grief. These stories repeat thousands of times across both cities. Communities are destroyed as thoroughly as buildings. Neighborhoods that existed for centuries disappear. Social networks that provided support and identity are severed. Traditional festivals cease. Local shrines are demolished. The social fabric that gave meaning to daily life tears beyond repair. Survivors often relocate, unable to remain in places that remind them of unbearable loss. Those who stay must rebuild not just physical structures, but entire communities from nothing, a task that takes generations. Graves and memorials proliferate slowly as the city begins confronting its loss. Temporary markers appear at sites where families know their loved ones died. Stone monuments are erected at schools where entire classes perished. The cenotaph for the atomic bomb victims, designed by architect Kenzo Tanga, is built in 1952 in Peace Memorial Park. It contains the names of all known victims, a list that grows each year as more radiation-related deaths are confirmed. By the 21st century, the registry contains over 300,000 names. The monument bears an inscription, "Rest in peace, for the error shall not be repeated." Missing persons searches continue for years. The Hiroshima Red Cross compiles lists of missing individuals and attempts to match them with unidentified dead or survivors who cannot remember their own names due to trauma. Families post notices seeking information about loved ones. Many searches prove futile. Thousands simply vanished, vaporized by the fireball, burned beyond recognition, or buried in unmarked mass graves. Their families never receive confirmation of death, never find remains to cremate properly, never achieve the closure traditional funeral rites provide. The uncertainty proves as tormenting as confirmed death. Invisible scars persist across generations. Hibakusha carry trauma that never fully heals. They suffer nightmares, flashbacks, and severe anxiety. Survivor guilt afflicts those who lived while family members died. Many develop depression. Suicide rates among survivors exceed general population rates. Children born to Hibakusha suffer increased rates of genetic abnormalities and birth defects, though not as severely as initially feared. The psychological burden passes to subsequent generations who grow up with parents unable to speak about their experiences, families defined by absence and loss, communities haunted by atomic ghosts. One survivor, Akiko Takakura, later testifies, "I was 20 years old, working at the Hiroshima Bank 400 meters from the hypercenter. Everyone else in the building died. I survived by chance, protected by the building's concrete structure. But I spent the next 70 years asking myself why I lived when everyone around me died." A nurse working in relief stations writes, "We had thousands of patients and almost no medicine, no bandages, no equipment. We could only give them water and watch them die. The burns were so severe that skin would come off in our hands when we tried to treat them." The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the strategic calculus of World War II irrevocably. Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, comes 6 days after Nagasaki's destruction and coincides with the Soviet offensive in Manchuria. Whether the atomic bombs alone forced surrender, or whether the combination of nuclear weapons and Soviet entry proved decisive, remains debated. What is certain is that the bombings demonstrated a level of destructive power that made continued resistance futile. Japan's military leadership, which refused to surrender after months of conventional bombing that destroyed 67 cities, could not ignore weapons that annihilated entire urban centers in single attacks. The immediate strategic impact was the war's end without invasion. Operation Downfall, the planned Allied invasion of Japan, would have begun in November 1945 with Operation Olympic, the assault on Kyushu. Military planners anticipated fierce resistance. Japanese forces prepared elaborate defensive positions. Civilians trained for mass suicide attacks. Estimates of potential casualties varied widely, but even conservative projections suggested hundreds of thousands of Allied deaths and millions of Japanese military and civilian casualties. The atomic bombs, by forcing immediate surrender, prevented this apocalyptic scenario. Whether this justifies their use remains one of history's most contentious moral questions. The political consequences extended far beyond ending World War II. The atomic bombings inaugurated the nuclear age and fundamentally altered international relations. The weapons demonstrated that science had created the means for human civilization's complete destruction. This reality shaped Cold War dynamics for 4.5 decades. Nuclear deterrence became the foundation of superpower strategy. The United States and Soviet Union accumulated tens of thousands of nuclear warheads in an arms race premised on mutual assured destruction. The logic was perverse but effective. Neither side would start nuclear war because doing so guaranteed their own annihilation along with their enemies. Long-term military consequences included doctrinal transformations across all armed forces. Nuclear weapons rendered traditional concepts of strategic bombing, naval supremacy, and massed armies potentially obsolete. Military planners wrestled with how to fight wars in the nuclear age. Could conventional conflicts occur without escalating to nuclear exchange? What role did traditional forces play when a few bombers could destroy entire nations? These questions drove military thinking for generations. They produced concepts like limited war, flexible response, and graduated deterrence that attempted to make warfare possible without triggering nuclear apocalypse. Social and cultural impacts reverberated globally. The atomic bombings generated profound anxiety about technology's trajectory and humanity's future. Science fiction explored nuclear themes obsessively. Films like Godzilla, created in Japan in 1954, used atomic monsters as metaphors for nuclear horror. Anti-nuclear movements emerged advocating disarmament and non-proliferation. Hibakusha became powerful witnesses, traveling internationally to share their experiences and warn against nuclear weapons. Their testimonies humanized abstract discussions of megatonnage and throw weight, reminding the world that nuclear war means incinerated children, not just destroyed military targets. Hiroshima and Nagasaki rebuilt themselves as cities of peace. Hiroshima's population, which fell to approximately 137,000 immediately after the bombing, recovered to pre-war levels by 1955 and continued growing. The city became a center for peace education and nuclear disarmament advocacy. The Peace Memorial Museum, opened in 1955, preserves artifacts from the bombing and educates visitors about nuclear weapons' humanitarian consequences. Every August the 6th, Hiroshima holds memorial ceremonies attended by survivors, dignitaries, and ordinary citizens committed to ensuring atomic bombs are never used again. Memory of the bombings differs across cultures and nations. In the United States, many view the atomic bombs as necessary to end the war and save lives. This narrative emphasizes Japanese aggression, atrocities committed during Japan's wars of conquest, and the projected casualties from invasion. American museums and textbooks typically present the bombings as regrettable but justified. In Japan, memory focuses on victimhood and suffering. The bombings are often depicted as crimes against humanity visited upon largely innocent civilian populations. This narrative sometimes minimizes Japanese wartime aggression and atrocities, creating tensions with other Asian nations that suffered under Japanese occupation. The weapon's technical legacy transformed warfare permanently. Nuclear proliferation proceeded despite efforts to prevent it. 9 nations now possess nuclear weapons: the United States, Russia, Britain, France, China, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea. Total global stockpiles peaked at approximately 70,000 warheads during the Cold War and have declined to roughly 13,000 today. Yet even this reduced number represents destructive capacity dwarfing anything previously imaginable. Modern thermonuclear weapons are hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A single contemporary nuclear warhead can destroy an entire metropolitan area. International efforts to control nuclear weapons include the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, signed in 1968, which commits nuclear weapon states to disarmament and non-nuclear states to forswearing nuclear weapons. Compliance remains imperfect. Nuclear-armed states reduce their arsenals, but refuse complete disarmament. Non-nuclear states sometimes pursue weapons programs clandestinely. The treaty regime faces challenges from states like North Korea that withdrew from the treaty and developed nuclear weapons. The possibility of nuclear terrorism adds another dimension of threat. Preventing nuclear proliferation remains among humanity's most critical security challenges. Lessons from Hiroshima and Nagasaki resonate across multiple domains. Militarily, they demonstrate that technological superiority can determine war's outcome, regardless of numerical advantages or fighting spirit. Politically, they show that weapons of mass destruction create dilemmas without satisfactory solutions. Using them risks moral condemnation and potentially civilizational suicide, yet possessing them may deter aggression. Humanely, they reveal war's capacity for inflicting suffering on scales that challenge comprehension. The atomic bombings killed more people in minutes than medieval armies killed in entire campaigns. Modern weapons make total war potentially species-ending. The historical meaning remains contested. Some see the bombings as tragic but necessary acts that saved lives by ending the war quickly. Others view them as war crimes, the deliberate incineration of civilian populations that violated moral boundaries even war should respect. Still others see them as understandable decisions made in extremis during total war, neither purely justified nor purely criminal, but tragic choices in circumstances offering no good options. Historical perspective provides understanding, but not definitive judgment on questions ultimately moral rather than empirical. What remains indisputable is the human cost and the warning it represents. Over 300,000 people died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki from two relatively primitive nuclear weapons. Modern arsenals contain warheads thousands of times more powerful. A major nuclear exchange would kill hundreds of millions immediately and potentially billions through subsequent environmental collapse. The cities destroyed on August the 6th and 9th, 1945, stand as monuments to both human destructive capacity and human resilience. They were annihilated, they survived, they rebuilt, they remember, and they warn future generations of what must never happen again. As historian Richard Rhodes later reflects, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated that human beings had acquired the power to destroy civilization itself. The question since has been whether we possess the wisdom to prevent ourselves from using that power. The answer remains uncertain. The Hibakusha bear witness, so that we might choose survival over annihilation. The mushroom clouds above Hiroshima and Nagasaki cast shadows that stretch across generations and into an unknowable future.